All right, so let's begin. Bismillah. Science and scientism. Now, the first thing I like to talk about is definitions. That's the first thing anyone should do, especially when going to philosophical inquiry. And the reason that definitions are important is because you don't really understand what's going on unless, of course, you understand your terms. Now, before going to that as well, two things. This is probably going to be one of the most important topics you learn when trying to understand atheism. And I'm not just saying that because I'm teaching the course, but yes, if you want me to flatter myself, that's fine. The reason this is the most important subject is because this deals with the epistemology, or the way in which atheists understand the world. Most atheists today, most contemporary atheists, believe that most or all knowledge can be derived from science itself, from the methodology of science itself. So if you do not understand science or how atheists think about science, then you won't understand atheism at all, or how atheists think in general. Secondly, disclaimer, even after this course, you're not going to know everything about science and scientism. This is a very basic course. We're not going to get through much within 2 hours. We're going to do as best as we can. But this should give you some foundation. All right, so let's begin with definitions. All right. Oh, actually, first, Thomas Kuhn, one of my favorite philosophers, and he said something very wise, and it doesn't seem like it's wise, but think about it. The answer you get depends on the questions you ask, and I hope that people ask many, many, many questions during this lecture. You don't have to ask them at the end of the lecture. You can ask them anytime. You can even ask them about random things. I like to rant, so that's fine as well, as long as it's not too off topic. Okay. We'll be discussing Thomas Kuhn later as well. What is science? Okay, first definition should be basic enough, right? All right, you guys need to know this. The intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. That's it. For those of you who may be science majors, maybe in the medical field, this shouldn't be surprising to you in the least. All right, so let's move on to the next definition, which is going to be the most important one we're going to be discussing. Here we go. What is scientism? All right, so what's the difference? The belief that the methods of natural science, or the categories and things recognized in natural science, form the only proper elements in any philosophical or other inquiry. In other words, for concise format, science is the only or best way to know anything. That's it. That's really the only part you have to memorize there. But that's the general definition of scientism. Now, before going into the nature of science, the specifics about what science and scientism are, I want to discuss kind of how science influences the way that we think and how we perceive it in the contemporary period. So, is scientism a big deal? Is it something that we're just like making up right now? Is it something that has no real manifestation in the world? Is it something that people even think about? Well, honestly, most people are affected by this belief system, whether they explicitly believe it or it's just sort of like something that they've sort of subconsciously had from education or from the surrounding culture. So all of us are actually affected by this concept known as scientism. So let me show you how that is the case. Firstly, though, this is what atheists generally think about science. Okay? So here we have one of the new atheists, one of the well-known atheists among the new atheist crowd, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens. His name was Victor Stenger, the late Victor Stenger, and he pretty much concisely summarized what new atheists believe about science and the concept of God. And he said, the new atheists firmly insist that the personal Abrahamic or Islamic God is a scientific hypothesis that can be tested by the standard methods of science. So they honestly believe, most of the atheists today, that the concept of God and religion, everything else that comes with it, is actually a scientific hypothesis. They actually believe this. So this is the more explicit form of scientism coming out. So let's see how it affects us. What's the attraction to science? Many of you think about science every day, you just don't realize it, or when you do, you think about it in a very different manner. Power. The attraction to science has a lot to do with power. What does that mean? Well, let's think about what are the most powerful nations in the world today? The ones with what? The biggest weapons, most technology, most economic power, right? That's one of the biggest ways in which science influences us. We don't realize it. Technology, I already mentioned. Communication, what we're doing right now, how I'm communicating with all of you, is actually quite amazing if you think about it. Did you know that we've only had this technology for what, the past, what was it? Was it been since the 90s? Not even. That's amazing. You know, we take it for granted, but you have to really consider how much we've advanced technologically over the past few decades. I remember when the first cell phones came out, they were bigger than my head. Yeah, that was really embarrassing. Nobody wanted one back then. It was like the first time when the iPad came out. You know, nobody really wanted to carry that big thing, but now everyone has it. Thankfully, they got smaller as well. Anyways, so yeah, and the internet's an amazing thing. You know, before email, guess how we communicate with each other? It's insane. A lot of you are too young to remember that. I remember working on the first Mac. That was horrible. It was nice back then, but it was horrible compared to, to now. Health. We live in the first time in human history where you can be as unhealthy as possible and still live to average age. That's amazing. So eat as many Twinkies as you want, people, because you will live up to 70. Wealth, something we already kind of mentioned. Being able to process wealth, being able to earn wealth through our technology, through the healthcare. It's horrible here in the United States, though. A lot of exploitation, occurring through the insurance companies, etc. But wealth. So the attraction to science has a lot to do with all of these. And when we see all of this, we kind of have this idea in our minds that it has to do with our ethics or our cultural values. They're almost the same thing, Like the reason that we have all this power and technology and health and wealth is because we are in some way or another virtuous or civilized, So the worldly benefits of scientific and technological output allows people to feel a sense of power, control, and superiority over those who lack such things. The correlation between a society's ideas and this output often creates a necessary causal link in the mind between the two. In other words, a face value evaluation is made without concern for other factors that lead to these results. So when we look at the world, when we look at our scientific progress, we often think to ourselves how advanced we are, how awesome we are. But we don't ever think about the values behind those things. We don't think about how we got to that point. So let me kind of wake you guys up a little bit. But what about this? Pollution. We've been having some major problems in the world today with pollution. Why are we not considering that part of our scientific advancement? Why do we think, when we think about science, why do we not think about this aspect? Why do we focus on all the benefits, cell phones, but we don't focus on how that technology and how those things are made and what the damage is doing to our environment? Even when you look on the media, when they talk about pollution, when they talk about the ozone layer, do they blame any aspects of the scientific enterprise, or do they blame humans? They blame specifically humanity, humans' own errors. And of course, that's a rational thing to do, but they never tie it to science. The only time science is ever tied to anything, usually, is when it causes a benefit. Is that a realistic picture? Not really, because science, even when it causes benefits, is still the hands of humans, right? But you never hear it from that perspective. You always hear science is doing this, but you never hear what people are doing necessarily. There's never a human hand. It's always shown as sort of this objective, neutral thing outside, that's causing all these benefits, but is completely separated from the negativity. At least it's how media presents it. So pollution. We have a huge pollution problem in the world today. Actually, if you didn't already know this, the ozone layer is actually correcting itself now, alhamdulillah. But and hopefully, eventually we're all going to switch to electric cars anyway. So that'll even go, it will heal itself even further. And hopefully global warming will get less of an issue. But yeah, we had snow. I live in the South here in America, and we had 3 days of snow. Like, it wasn't really thick, but it was enough to be like, okay, why am I living down here? It's supposed to be warm. So you can see that even the environment, when you look around, it's becoming a lot more varied in terms of temperatures and in terms of weather conditions. And even the hurricanes are getting horrible now. Have you seen the size of the hurricanes? It's huge. Okay, go online later on after this lecture, look online about the size of hurricanes, and you can see there's a massive difference over the past 10, 20 years. Literally, hurricane sizes have doubled. It's incredible. All right, so let's move on. What else? WMDs. I think this is self-explanatory, but let me make this clear that a lot of people don't think about this aspect of science, unless, of course, they're only talking about warfare. But most people in the day-to-day lives do not think of science in this way. But this is one of the major impacts of scientific enterprise over the past couple of years. Now, going back to history again, many of you are too young. I'm too young to remember this, but I've studied history. But World War II wasn't that long ago, guys. It wasn't that long ago. It was less than 100 years ago. And the atomic bombs, pictures of those which you're seeing right here, weren't dropped very long ago. And they killed hundreds of thousands of people. This is a reality that many of you take for granted. And believe it or not, many of the major powers in the world are only powerful because they have hundreds of these lying around underground. That's a very disturbing thing. Next, exploitation. We don't think about that either. We look at our food production values, we look at the way in which our technology is made. But if you actually think about where you're getting your phones, if you think about where you're getting most of your technology, it's not in a very ethical manner. I feel guilty for holding this right now. But it's not a very ethical manner. Most of the scientific achievements that we have in terms of technology were built by the hands of individuals who do not have the same rights as you or I. For instance, children. If you go in many of the Southeast Asian countries, I've traveled the world a bit, so I've seen a lot of these things. Like in Malaysia, you find that a lot of people who are not of the age to be working are working. A lot of exploitation is occurring with immigrant labor and things like this. A lot of the technology you have, which I'm not trying to make everyone feel guilty, but it's produced in a very unethical manner. But we don't understand it that way because the way that we perceive science, once again, is separated from the values of a society. Okay, so there is little concern for these atrocities and more focus on the benefits they produce. While there is a minority attempting to stop these horrible practices, many individuals living in scientifically advanced societies have little to no concern. So in a way, this is how scientism kind of affects us in an indirect manner by allowing us to separate our understanding of science from the ethics behind it. We'll get into the reason why in a moment here. And the reason I'm speaking about scientism first, because before I get into what science is, I have to explain what science is not. Because a lot of you guys have been indoctrinated, including myself at one point, about what science is, and it's not that way at all. So if you believe in scientism, then you do not understand science. Okay? So yes, if you're wondering if I'm accusing some of these atheists who follow scientism of not understanding science, I'm doing exactly that. And I can, because I'm a philosopher. I'm allowed to do those things. We're the most annoying people on the planet. You'll figure out why in a moment. If you ever go to a gathering of scientists and there's a philosopher there, he's always by himself. What is the purpose behind this? Why is this occurring? How is this occurring? We don't just especially philosophers of science, we don't just want to do the science. We don't just want to see the science. We don't just want to see the product of science. We want to be able to understand how it got there, what the thought process was. What is a theory, for example? What does that mean? We're going to explain what that is later as well. We want to understand what is a fact. Why is science beneficial? Why is it not beneficial in certain respects? Where does it get us? Is science progressive? Things like this. And only philosophers ask those questions. And this is why scientists are annoyed by us, is because, all they want to do is sit in their labs all day. No offense to them. I mean, they do good work. But sometimes you need a father figure looking over you. So let's see what the three aspects of scientism are so that you guys understand a little better. And after this, we're going to go into the history of scientism, the history behind how this thought process began and where it ended up. So the three aspects of scientism are: 1, realism; 2, positivism; and 3, progressionism. It's a progressive understanding of science. So what are these three things? Well, let's start with realism first. Okay. Cue awesome graphics. Boom, boom. All right, here we go. Scientific theories are actual and true representations of reality independent of human biases, i.e. objective. Okay, so this is the first definition of the first aspect of what is scientism. It's called realism, scientific realism. Once again, scientific theories are actual and true representations of reality independent of human bias. They are objective, meaning whatever theories we've constructed, whether it be about gravity, whatever else, theory of evolution, for example, is an actual representation of how reality is. Okay? Independent of whatever you or I think about it. It doesn't matter what we think. It doesn't matter how we perceive it. That's how it is. Okay? Seems like common sense, right? That's how most people think about science, to be honest. Okay, so let's move on. Next, positivism. This is really the heart of scientism here, so I need you guys to remember this specifically. We're going to be talking about positivism a lot more later. This is a big definition. Science corresponds with rationality itself and is the only means to verify the truths and meanings of every possible statement and explanation. There are no metaphysical assumptions or reasons behind scientific thought. So if you had a class with Ustaz Hamza, was it last week, a few days ago? He talked about metaphysical assumptions. According to scientism, when they have this aspect of positivism in there are no metaphysical assumptions. There is no metaphysics. It doesn't exist. There are no abstractions. Mathematics, for example, it's just symbols. Things like that. There are no, meaning is not this abstract thing. Everything that I'm saying right now, for you to understand it, according to this, has to be verified empirically, scientifically. It has to be observed. You understand? So if I say, this is a very obvious example, but if I say my door is brown, I have to be able to, verify that to you. If I say, I'm sick right now, or I'm happy, or anything, even every emotion has to be verified scientifically. Every claim, every statement you utter, okay, has no meaning or any sort of content or substance unless it can be tied to some sort of empirical observation justified through scientific inquiry. Okay, now you might be like, well, that's crazy. Maybe, maybe not, right? But that is one of the central beliefs. Okay, and atheists will talk like this a lot too. That's why they always ask, can you prove this? Can you provide evidence for this? Everything needs evidence, right? Scientific evidence. They're always asking for this sort of evidence. Okay, next, progressionism. Should have wrote this progressionism, but okay, so science is a cumulative enterprise where each theory builds upon prior theories in a gradual manner. Okay, before we get into definition, I have a question by Abdullah Naman. Assalamu alaikum. To avoid the problem of scientism, positivism, they reword their claim and say it's absurd to believe to believe something ludicrous unless objective evidence for it is available. How do you respond to that? Okay, I'm trying to understand your question first. Give me a moment. You mean like extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence? Okay, how about this? How about we continue? I'll get back to this question later. I think you want to reword this later because you'll see how we discuss positivism at a later point. So we'll get back to this. Let's go back to progressionism first, though. Science is a cumulative enterprise where each theory builds upon prior theories in a gradual manner. I think all of you can probably admit, or at least most of you in this chat, can probably admit that this is something that you believe, that science is a cumulative process, meaning that prior theories were, they were correct to a degree. And then what happened is that some other scientists came along, they were brilliant, they found some new information, and they built upon the theories, and the theory just keeps gradually building upon itself like a building, right? Until it goes really, really high like the Burj Khalifa, okay? That's basically how people see science these days, a very gradual process, all right, in which we keep gaining knowledge and just keep getting more and more intelligent until we reach Star Trek or Star Wars, which is better. Come on, guys, you want a lightsaber, be quiet. So that's how most people think about scientism, or about science.